السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. So let's begin with the seventh juz. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم: وإذا سمعوا ما أنزل إلى الرسول ترى أعينهم تفيض من الدمع مما عرفوا من الحق يقولون ربنا آمنا فاكتبنا مع الشاهدين وما لنا لا نؤمن بالله وما جاءنا من الحق ونطمع أن يدخلنا ربنا مع القوم الصالحين فأثابهم الله بما قالوا جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها وذلك جزاء المحسنين والذين كفروا وكذبوا بآياتنا أولئك أصحاب الجحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تحرموا طيبات ما أحل الله لكم ولا تعتدوا إن الله لا يحب المعتدين. صدق الله العظيم. So let's mention a brief summary of the seventh juz. So this juz, like the previous one, has two parts. The first part is the remaining part of Surah Al-Ma'idah, and the second one is a large chunk of Surah Al-An'am. Now the remaining part of Surah Al-Ma'idah, there are three main points in this section. The first one is Allah's praise for the Christians of Habasha, Ethiopia. And the second one is some issues related to halal and haram. The third is a scenario, or Allah captures the situation on the day of judgment when nations will be asked and messengers would be asked. And at this point, Allah specifically mentions how Allah will address Isa alayhi salam on the day of judgment, asking him about what the Nasara claimed falsely about him. Now, when discussing halal and haram, there are a number of issues like the yameen, right? The four things Allah makes haram: wine, gambling, and the altars, and the arrows that they would use. And when it comes, inshallah, we'll discuss them. Another one is hunting during ihram, and whoever enters into haram is secure. And the four animals that the mushrikeen made haram on themselves, or the four types of animals, and wasiyah, and so on and so forth. So when it comes, inshallah, we will be detailing them one by one. The next part is Surah Al-An'am. Now in Surah Al-An'am, being a Makki surah, there are three main discussions: Tawheed, Risala, and Akhirah. And how these are discussed, there's a bit of detail, and there's a lot of back and forth of, Allah sometimes mentions Tawheed, Risala, then Risala and Akhirah, then Tawheed and Akhirah. It keeps changing. Now, let me just define the terms for now, for those who may not know what they refer to. So, Tawheed refers to the oneness of Allah. Risala refers to messengership. So, Allah sends messengers communicating to them what He wants from His servants on earth. And number three is Akhirah, the life hereafter, and the belief in it, because the mushrikeen, the polytheists of Mecca, they did not believe in resurrection and life after death. All right, so let's detail these discussions one by one. Now, if you would remember that yesterday we concluded by mentioning that Nasara, the Christians, many of them, or the true Christians, they are uh, more closer to Muslims in affection than the Yahud and the Mushrikeen. So Allah mentions of a situation about them that when they hear what has been revealed to the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you will see that their eyes will drip with tears, or tears will drip from their eyes because of the truth they recognize in the Quran. And they will say, "O our Rabb, we have believed, so write us with those who bear witness." Now, this is in reference to the Nasara of Habasha, Abyssinia. So, what would happen was, or what did happen was, that when Muslims were being heavily persecuted in Mecca in the fourth year of Nubuwwah, that's when persecution started, and it only got worse. So, about 2 or 3 years later, Muslims migrated to Ethiopia, Abyssinia. You can use them interchangeably. Let us not be confused what I mentioned earlier. It's really the same thing. So we'll stick to Abyssinia for now. So they migrated to there on the command of the Prophet ﷺ, because the king was Christian and just. So Muslims were, uh, after migrating there, quite safe and secure. The king, he took the responsibility of the security. But of course, Quraysh were not stopping at anything. So the people of Mecca, and especially Quraysh, they sent people behind them, Abdullah ibn Umayyah and Amr ibn As. And they tried to get the Muslims from them so they can take them back and persecute them further. Now, of course, they were unsuccessful in their attempt. And at this point, when Najashi called the Muslims and sought clarification of their beliefs, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, Ja'far al-Tayyar, the cousin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the great Sahabi, he read Surah Maryam. So when they heard the Quran, they realized that this is the same thing that Isa alayhi salam was actually telling us, and they wept profusely. So Allah refers to this, and really, the Quran is something that, if listened with an open heart, an open mind, and with sincerity, it will guide you, it will move you, it will soften you. That's why we need to use the Quran in our da'wah. It's very important. Because the Quran, its words affect people. Even if they don't understand it, it affects them. Some people told me that even kuffar who were, very depressed, and they were perplexed in their life, they would listen to Quran even though they didn't believe in it, just because it would give them a soothing feeling. This is the Quran, it's the word of Allah, it's divine words, it should not be taken lightly. Now, thereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions a number of injunctions. Now, Surah Al Ma'idah is about halal and haram. It's a Madani surah, read in the Madani period, and there's details of halal and haram. So Allah does mention some issues. The first one is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in verse number 87 and 88 that, O believers, the right of tahleel and tahreem, making something halal and haram, is exclusive for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No human being can make something halal and haram. That's Allah's right. So those tayyibat, those good things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made lawful for you, use them. Keep them lawful for yourselves. And This further highlights that Islam is Deen al-Fitrah. It's the deen which is based on nature. Right? People talk about Mother Nature. Leave Mother Nature. Just follow Islam. It's the most natural deen. فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها. So it's the natural path is also the middle path, away from ifrat and tafrit, away from ghulu and taqsir, away from both extremes, taking something's too high or too low. You don't want to take them too high, you don't put them too low. You want to keep them in equilibrium, in balance, in the middle way. So those things that are halal, right, to use them in a balanced way, Islam recommends it. And then to stay away from it and to think that is some form of high level of taqwa, that's not really taqwa. Right. And those things that Islam has prohibited, to make them allowed and to try to search for ways to make it, to halalify it for you, so to say, that's not allowed as well. Thereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the ruling about yameen, taking an oath. Now, there's three types of oaths a person can take. Two are mentioned in this surah, or in verse number 89. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah does not take to task those oaths of yours that are lahu. Now, lahu is literally something which is a mistake. Now, that refers to a person who took an oath that wallahi or so something happened in the past, thinking that it happened, but it didn't happen. So this is lahu. There is no sin for this, and there's no kafara and expiation. The second type is al-yaminul mun'aqida. It's that oath that a person says wallahi or the like, that something I will do, and then he doesn't do it. So this is an oath where a person does have to give kafara and expiation. And what is that expiation? And this is very important. It's a very important point here. A lot of people make this mistake. They fast 3 days. It doesn't start from there. Allah says that فَكَفَّارَتُهُ إِطْعَامُ عَشَرَةِ مَسَاكِينَ to the end of the verse. That the expiation is feeding 10 poor people. What should you feed them? The normal food that you feed your families. If you can't do that, then clothing them. Right? You clothe 10 poor people. And if you can't do that, then you free one slave. If you can't do all three, then فَصِيَامُ ثَلَاثَةِ أَيَّامٍ, then you fast 3 days. Right, 3 consecutive days. Now, the third type of oath that is al-yaminul ghamus. It's called ghamus because it causes a person to dip himself in sin, then dip himself in Jahannam. So this is an oath which is a major sin, and that is that a person, he takes an oath that he or you can say a person takes an oath on something which he knows is false. That wallahi, that happened, and he knows it didn't happen. That's a lie. You're taking the name of Allah whilst lying. So this person, he has committed a major sin. He must do tawbah and istighfar, although there is no kafara in this case. Thereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in verse 90 and 92 tells us about the 4 things that are prohibited. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب والأزلام. that, oh, those who have brought iman in wine, wal maisir, gambling, and altars. Altars refers to the act in which the pagans used to offer sacrifices to the idols. So that altar that they used to offer sacrifices on. Right? And here refers to the act of sacrificing. And the divining arrows are filth, as lam. And those were used for drawing lots in a false manner. So Allah says all these four are rijsun, they are filth. Number two, min amali shaitan, they are from the action of shaitan. Fajtanibu, to stay away from it completely, so that you may find success. What does shaitan want to do? Allah tells us in verse 92, or verse 91, that shaitan wants to cause enmity and hatred amongst yourselves by using wine, gambling against you, and so that he may avert you away, divert you away, take you away from the path of Allah and from Salah. So will you stop from this and obey Allah and obey His Messenger? And then verse 93 mentions that there is no blame or sin upon those who ate, if they drank wine, as long as they had taqwa, they believed in Allah and they done righteous actions, till the end of the verse. Now this is a case sensitive verse. It falls under Asbab al-Nuzul. That's why the ulama of Ulum al-Qur'an mentioned that you must know the Asbab al-Nuzul to interpret the Qur'an. This verse was revealed regarding those who passed away before wine became prohibited. What is their ruling? Sahaba were worried that what would happen to their brothers that passed away. Are they now sinful? Did they do the amal of shaitan? So Allah says they are forgiven as long as they were people of taqwa and righteous actions and correct beliefs. But for you now, and for us, for me and you, till the day of judgment, it is prohibited. You can't use this verse to make khumr halal for yourself, make wine halal for yourself. And there are some foolish people that do this. Now, whilst at this, there's two things I need to mention. One is that I promised before that I would mention that what are the stages that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited wine. And these stages, they teach us how to get rid of addictions. And addictions are something very common. There are food addictions, watching inappropriate content, smoking, drugs, and so on and so forth. So how do we get rid of addictions? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us by the way He prohibited the drinking of wine. Something that the Arabs had 100+ names for. Wine. That's how much they loved it. And whenever you love something, you give more names to it. So first and foremost, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-Nahl, which is a Makki surah, that وَمِن ثَمَرَاتِ النَّخِيلِ وَالْأَعْنَابِ تَتَّخِذُونَ مِنْهُ سَكَرًا وَرِزْقًا حَسَنًا إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَةً لِقَوْمٍ يَعْقِلُونَ. Ayah 67. So chapter 16, verse 67. That amongst the fruits of date palms and grapes, so of course dates and grapes, that you derive from it intoxication and good provision. And in that there's a sign for those who think. So if Allah has mentioned intoxication and He's mentioned good provision, He has not included intoxication, good provision. So a person would think, why did Allah do this? Why did Allah strike a difference? And a person will get to think, like Umar radiallahu anhu was thinking. And then in Surah Al-Baqarah, and we read this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in chapter 2, verse 219, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْبَيْسِرِ قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ. They ask you about wine and gambling. Say, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to them that there is great harm and many benefits for the people therein. But their harms, ithm here refers to harm, their harms are greater, are more than their benefit. So now Allah is being very clear on the harms, that the harms are greater. Then the third verse, it came down. And this was a verse in Surah An-Nisa that we read in the 5th juz. So Surah An-Nisa chapter 4 verse 43. Allah says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى حتى تعلموا ما تقولون. O those who have brought Iman, do not come even close to prayer whilst you are drunk until you know what you are saying. So then there was a partial prohibition. Then Umar radiallahu anh, he said, Oh Allah, tell us about khamar, bayan and shafiyan. Tell us something very clear and satisfying. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down this verse in Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter 5, verse 90, where Allah says, Fajtanibu, avoid it completely. So there is complete prohibition. This is one of the muwafaqat of Umar, where Umar will say something and the Quran will come just like that. It shows how Umar radiallahu anh, he was an inspired person, as the Prophet explained. Not divert into this topic, perhaps that can be put in another lesson we can deliver later on. So what are the stages? How do you get rid of an addiction? First and foremost, you need to list the benefits of leaving it and the harms of indulging in it. Number two, you need to concentrate on the harms. So you need to really make yourself feel and remind yourself every morning, every evening perhaps, or on a regular basis about the harms. Number three, you put partial prohibitions on yourself. So a person is watching inappropriate content and Netflix, everything. A person is doing all sorts of drugs and he smokes. So you start cutting out the things that you can cut out. So you do partial prohibition on yourself. And then when you are strong enough, you do a complete prohibition. That's how you get rid of an addiction. And this is the way Allah eradicated the filthy act of wine or drinking wine from Arabia. And something that even the US tried so much and spent so much money on in the previous century, but were unsuccessful. The second thing, or the second point I want to mention, is that having leisure or having fun, and enjoyment, entertainment, is something that human beings have always done. Right? It's something that is unavoidable. So, but of course, the scholars have laid down or have extracted certain rules from the Quran and Sunnah, by which we need to abide by whenever we have any form of entertainment. So the first and foremost is that activity should not contain any haram elements like music, gambling, exposing the private parts, etc., and so on and so forth. Number two is the entertainment activity should not distract one from salah. Look, Allah talks about salah here in verse 91. And nor the sunnah mu'akkadas or his obligatory duties like obedience to parents, attending to one's chores and responsibilities. Number three, the activity, games, entertainment, so on and so forth, should not cause one to become unmindful and inconsiderate to others. So using abusive language, belittling people, having useless arguments, fighting, holding grudges and jealousy and hatred, all of that. Number four, it should not give or have a negative impact on one's daily responsibility. So this is almost built on the previous one. Number five, the game and entertainment should not be of the nature that one becomes obsessed with it, or it leads him to get an overindulgence. That should not be the case. Number six, there should be no extravagance or imitation of the salient features of the kuffar. There should not be any form of tashabbuh, right? That's why some scholars, they prohibit or they prevent from, bursting fireworks and so on and so forth. Number seven, the entertainment should not be of such a nature that belittles Islam directly and indirectly. Like some comedy shows that you make fun of the sha'air of deen. Now, I'm not against comedy at all, but comedy needs to be following the dictates of Islam, because Islam comes before anything. Number eight, there should be no intermingling of sexes, like the females and females, right? They should be apart, right? The ikhtilat should not be. So those entertainments that don't have this, might as well. It's very important to be healthy, to be strong, to eat well, to have strength, right? To that as the health professionals advise, that's very important. But we need to pertain to Islam first and foremost. All right. Thereafter, in verse 94 to 96, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that when a person is in the condition of ihram, whether of Hajj or Umrah, a person cannot hunt the animals of the land. Yes, the animals of sea, you can hunt them, you can get fish and so on and so forth. And if a person does hunt an animal, then he needs to give such an animal back in return. The details can be sought from the ulama. All right, let's continue further. Since ihram has been mentioned, Allah also tells us about the Baytullah al-Haram, the sanctity of the haram, that a salient or a very important factor of the haram is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it the place where all people go to. And Allah has granted its sanctity such that a person cannot hunt there, a person cannot kill someone there, and he who comes there is granted security, amnesty. So that's why the famous statement of Umar comes into play here, where he said that if I found the killer of my father Khattab in the haram, I would not kill him and enact my revenge up and until he does not leave the hudud of the haram, the limits of the haram. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he tells us in verse 101 that Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu لا تسألوا عن أشياء إن تبد لكم تسؤكم وإن تسألوا عنها حين ينزل القرآن تبد لكم عفى الله عنها والله غفور حليم. O those who have brought iman, don't ask of those things if they are made clear to you. تسؤكم, it would harm you. So one Sahabi, he asked the Prophet ﷺ that after he explained that you must do Hajj, he asked, every year should we perform Hajj? The Prophet ﷺ stayed quiet. He asked again, the Prophet stayed quiet. That's the third time. The Prophet ﷺ replied that if I was to say yes, it would have been made for you every year and you would not have been able to do it. So we don't ask of those things that are, not necessary. Some people have a bad habit of always asking about every single minute detail. And they make life difficult on themselves. So that should not be the case. All right. The surah shifts back into halal and haram as far as consumption is concerned. And it reminds us that halal and haram is in Allah's hand. Making something halal and haram is in Allah's hand. So we should not take it in our hands like the mushrikeen did. What did they do? They made bahira, sa'iba, wasila, and ham. 4 sorts of animals haram on themselves. Allah explains that there's no such thing as this. Allah did not do anything as such. And this is mentioned in verse 103. Now there's a huge discussion among scholars on what exactly these animals are. And the opinions are very similar. So one of the most reliable ones is that bahira is a she camel whom they used to pierce its ear, and then they would make it prohibited for anyone to mount them or to slaughter it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about that. I will just explain it to one of the opinions of Sa'id al-Musayyib. It's mentioned in Tafseer al-Tabari, anyone who wants can refer back to it. So Bahira was the name of an animal whose milk was dedicated to the idols. We will stick to this opinion. No one could drink the milk, and as a sign of its dedication, the animal's ear was cut in a particular way. Another was the Sa'iba. The Sa'iba was also released in the name of idols, and nobody was allowed to use it for any purpose whatsoever. So that could have been a she camel, or a cow, or a sheep, right? And they would say that no one can use it. Sa'ib is an animal that just left like this. It can go eat and from anywhere. It cannot be used for riding, and so on and so forth. Wasila was a she camel giving birth to female calves consecutively without a male in between. And some add the number 10. So 10 consecutive female calves are given birth to, baby camels are given birth to by the she camel. And this she camels was also released in the name of idols. Hami was a male camel that had copulated with a particular number of she camels thereafter. It was released in the name of idols. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us through this that we cannot make anything halal and haram. It's actually in the hands of Allah. Because Allah is Al-Hakim. He knows what needs to be legislated and what does not. Now thereafter Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in verse 106 and 108 tells us that if a person feels death approaching, then he should make his wasiyah. In fact, a person should have his wasiyah with him throughout his life. I personally have my will written. Everyone should have the will written. And any updates you need to make as far as any right of Allah or right of a slave is concerned, you should have it written. And no 2 nights should pass, as the Hadith in Sahih Muslim explains, except that you should update that will. It's unbecoming of a Muslim that he doesn't do that. So, when you make a will and death is approaching, then you should make 2 people as a witness to the contents of the will, so that someone can be aware witness that you actually made a will, because you are going to pass away. After mentioning the issues of halal and haram, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that awe-filling moment when everyone will be gathered before Allah on the day of judgment. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be asking everyone directly. There will be no intermediary between Allah and the slave. لَيْسَ بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَهُ تَرْجُمَانٌ. What did they do? Anbiya would be asked by Allah, how did they deliver the message? So the day Allah will gather the prophets and He will say, what were you replied with when you gave da'wah to your nations? So at this same juncture, Allah will ask Isa alayhi salam. And this account of Isa alayhi salam is what's mentioned in detail. That of the other Anbiya is mentioned briefly. So Allah will remind Isa alayhi salam of His favors that He gave to him and his mother. He was supported by Ruh al-Qudus, and he would speak to people in the cradle and when he was old. And this old indicates when Isa alayhi salam would come back, because he was raised at the age of 33 or 30. And Allah taught him the book, Torah and Injil, and the many miracles he had. And at this point, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the miracle of Al-Ma'idah. Al-Ma'idah is a tablecloth. So Isa alayhi salam was with his disciples, and the disciples asked that, "O Isa, the son of Maryam, ask your Rabb to send for us from the sky a tablecloth having food." Isa alayhi salam said, "Fear Allah if you are believers. Do not ask Allah for such a miracle, because if Allah does send it and you happen to fall into error, Allah will destroy you." They said, "No, we want to eat from it. We want to have satisfaction of our hearts, and we know, and we want to really know for sure that you are truthful in the message you've delivered to us." All right. So Isa alayhi salam made dua. Allah sent the Ma'idah. So Allah reminds that Allah is the one that done this, not Isa alayhi salam. Then Allah will ask Isa alayhi salam, "Did you say to the people that take me and my mother as gods other than Allah?" At that time, Isa alayhi salam will filled with awe and fear. And the narrations mention some description of this. He will say, Subhanaka, ma yakunu li an aqula ma laysa li bihaq. Pure are you, O Allah. It is unbecoming for me to say something which is not true. If I said it, you know everything about me. You know what's inside me. I don't know what's inside me. I only told them that they worship one Allah. So when Isa alayhi salam is saying that which the Christians do not, that which the Christians do not agree on, or Christians are saying that Isa alayhi salam doesn't even agree with, how dare they concoct these lies against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concludes in the surah that to Allah belongs the dominions of the sky and the earth, and He is over all things competent. And the surah concludes and finishes. The next surah is Surah Al-An'am. The Surah Al-An'am is the sixth surah in the order of the Qur'an, as some estimated to be around the 55th surah as far as Revelation is concerned. But like I said, we don't give a lot of importance to it. It has 20 rukus, 165 ayat, 3,100 words, and 12,935 letters, according to the enumeration of some scholars. Now, this is a Mecca surah. Up until now, we've been doing Madani surahs, surahs revealed in the Medina phase of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and this was revealed in the Mecca phase, and it was revealed all at once. Some narrations add, with 70,000 angels, this surah came down. Now, what's the main topic of this surah? The main topic and axis around which this surah revolves around, according to some scholars, is تقرير عقيدة التوحيد, to establish the aqidah of tawheed, and وإبطال عقيدة الشرك, and to destroy and annihilate the belief of shirk and polytheism. And this is the surah by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a lot of Allah teaches us how to argue. If someone wants to learn how to debate with mushrikeen, this surah tells us the lessons of that. And many of the adab or many of the usul of munadhara scholars derive from this surah. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He uses two ways in the surah continuously, again and again and again. Right? Sometimes it's the first one, then sometimes the second one, then the second one, and then first one. It's just a lot of back and forth. Those two are uslub al-taqrir and uslub al-talqeen. Now, uslub al-taqrir is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He presents the proofs of Tawheed, His oneness, His power, with such you can say premises that a human cannot reject them. Any person whom Allah has granted a clear heart and a clean mind will need to accept this. So by looking at the surah, you will see these types of proof, those uslub al-taqrir, this style repeated again and again. For example, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the creation of the sky, the earth, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the knowledge of everything. These were things that the mushrikeen even accepted. And these are not proofs that a person needs to really, you don't have to do a mental exercise for this. You don't have to connect many logical premises for this. They're very basic things. Anyone who puts his eyes on the cosmos, on the world, on the universe, they will conclude of Allah's existence, His greatness, His power, that the fact that Allah has overcome everything, the fact that everything is Allah's control, the fact that Allah has complete knowledge. So, for example, let's pick out a few verses and show you guys. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He is Allah, wa huwa Allah, fis samawati wa fil ard. That is Allah, whose dominion is in the skies and in the earth. or He is the true God in the heavens and the earth. He knows what you conceal and what you reveal, and He knows what you earn. And another verse, for example, let's take verse 60 and verse 61. Allah says, in verse 61, وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ وَيُرْسِلُ عَلَيْكُمْ حَفَظًا. Allah is the being who has overcome all His servants. Everyone is under Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He sends guardians over you. So angels who keep record of our deeds and protect ourselves from many calamities, as well as some narrations explain. And Allah says in verse 60, وَهُوَ الَّذِي يَتَوَفَّاكُمْ بِاللَّيْلِ وَيَعْلَمُ مَا جَرَحْتُمْ بِالنَّهَارِ ثُمَّ يَبْعَثُكُمْ فِيهِ لِيُقْضَى أَجَلٌ مُسَمًّى ثُمَّ إِلَيْهِ مَرْجِعُكُمْ ثُمَّ يُنَبِّئُكُم بِمَا كُنتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. That He is who is Allah? He is the being who causes you to die at night. And He knows what you do by the day, and He makes you rise up therein, so that a fixed term may be fulfilled, whatever lifespan Allah has given you. Thereafter to Him are you to return, and He will tell you what you have been doing. So these things, the basic things, you know, that every person in that time, right, where the belief in God was the common belief, would believe it is Allah and alone. He is alone. He is all powerful. He is almighty. He is all knowledgeable. And this is a way a person should talk about Allah to Muslims. It's very important to talk about Allah. People talk about all sorts of things today, but the discussion about Allah, it's way too less. It needs to become more. The second style Allah uses is uslub al-talqeen. Uslub al-talqeen is basically that Allah gives such proofs to the unlettered messenger, Habib sallallahu alayhi wasallam, regarding which the mushrikeen had no answer, or against which the mushrikeen had no answer, and they would have to be put to shame and put their heads down. And Allah usually uses this style in question and answer format. For example, let's look at verse 12. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that قُلْ لِمَنْ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ قُلْ لِلَّهِ كَتَبَ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ الرَّحْمَةِ لَا يَجْمَعَنَّكُمْ إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ فَهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that say, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, to these mushrikeen, to whom belongs all that is in the skies and the earth, the heavens and the earth? Of course, they're going to become quiet. They know what the answer is. قُلْ لِلَّهِ. Say, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that it belongs to Allah. He has prescribed mercy for Himself. He will surely gather you on the day of resurrection, in which there is no doubt those who have brought loss to themselves are not going to believe. And in another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in verse 19 that قُلْ أَيُّ شَيْءٍ أَكْبَرُ شَهَادَةً قُلْ لِلَّهُ شَهِيدٌ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكُمْ. That, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, say to these mushrikeen, whose testimony is the greatest? Say, Allah is the witness between me and you, and this Qur'an has been revealed to me so that I should thereby warn you and whosoever it may reach. Do you really bear witness that there are other gods along with Allah? Say, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I bear no such witness. Say, in fact, He is one God. I disown what you associate with Him. So, in this way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with a lot of back and forth in this surah, He establishes His existence, His omnipresence, His power, and His might. Now, another look in the surah is the look and its structure. So the surah starts off with الحمد لله الذي خلق السماوات والأرض وجعل الظلمات والنور ثم الذين كفروا بربهم يعدلون. And of course, this surah's beginning correlates and connects with the previous surah's end, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about Him having the dominion of the skies and the earth. And in the beginning of this surah, Allah says He is the creator of the skies and the earth. And the creator of something is its owner. Or Allah is a creator, or both the creator of something and its owner. Okay, I wouldn't say that's a general rule, but for Allah, that is the rule. So Allah says, all praise belongs to Allah, the creator of the skies and the earth, the one who created the darknesses and the light. And then what happens? ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بِرَبِّهِمْ يَعْدِلُونَ. Then those who disbelieve, they equate others with their Lord. You, who are you? هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن طِينٍ ثُمَّ قَضَى أَجَلًا. He created you from clay. And then He destined a term for you, right? A term for everything Allah's made. The world has a term, a lifespan that it will go through and then it will finish. Then Allah says again, وَهُوَ اللَّهُ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَفِي الْأَرْضِ. He is Allah in the skies and the earth. Then Allah says about the conditions of the mushrikeen, that any sign that comes to them, they turn away from it. So this is about Tawheed, right? And the sign coming to them, this indicates Risala. And verse 16, it tells us how they used to deny the Akhirah. They would say that Allah says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will definitely gather you on the day of resurrection. لَيَجْمَعَنَّكُمْ إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ. Sorry, not verse 16, verse 12. Allah will definitely gather you on the day of judgment in which there is no doubt. So I guess these discussions continue throughout the surah. Let me tell you two more instances. So there's a lot of back and forth, so it's hard for me to pick the exact instance and to detail all of them. Okay, this would require a whole tafseer for the surah, and we do not have that time within the 1 hour that we have. So I'll probably pick two places for this. The first one is in verse 31. Allah says that those who deny the meeting with Allah are definitely at loss. So much so that the hour comes to them suddenly. And they will say, oh, how regretful is our action, how we have fallen short in our belief. When these mushrikeen, Allah mentions around these verses, will be gathered around the Jahannam. And when they see the difficulty of Jahannam, that it's a huge monster and its fire even eats itself, they won't listen to anyone other than Allah. They will wish, oh, we can go back to this world. So those things that we denied about that the Messenger told us, we can believe in it. Allah tells us that even if they went back, they would do the same thing. Then Allah warns us in verse 32 that why were they misled? وَمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا لَعِبٌ وَلَهْوٌ. That the life of this world is nothing but play and ploy, play and amusement. You know, if you see kids playing, either playing soccer, kicking the ball right, left, and center, here and there, you're juggling the ball, and so on and so forth. What is an adult going to say? They're playing. Allah's telling us we are playing in this world with all the politics we have, trying to make our influence, trying to build your assets, trying to build your money, trying to build a name for yourself, trying to compete with one another in children and in wealth and in houses and so on and so forth. Oh, which one of us is the most good looking? Or what clothes was I wearing? Right? What clothes is she wearing? Oh, she dresses like this. She dresses like that. It's just a game. It's just a game. Allah tells us just a game. The serious life gets serious in the akhirah. Prepare for it before it comes. Another instance is in verse 68. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam here in this verse that when you see those who do hold, they overindulge regarding our verses by making fun, mockery, and expressing disrespect to Allah, they turn away from them until they desist from this. Now, the command is to the Prophet ﷺ, but the Mufassirun explain that this ayah is a'am. It is general. It is indicating to the Ummah as well that when we see people not ready to listen to the da'wah of Islam, they are just making fun and amusement, so on and so forth. We don't go further. We will stop and we turn away. Now, after discussing Tawheed in a lot of detail, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the beacon of Tawheed in a world filled by the darkness of shirk, namely Ibrahim alayhi salam. Now Ibrahim alayhi salam was born in a family that were the leaders of shirk. His father was in some narrations the right hand man of Namrud. He would build idols and call people to worship them, and he was very stern on his belief. So much so he exiled Ibrahim alayhi salam eventually when he expressed his da'wah of Tawheed. But Ibrahim alayhi salam continued on his da'wah. And from verse 74 all the way down to verse 82, Allah mentions this. Now, Allah says, and remember when Ibrahim alayhi salam said to his father Azar, will you take idols as gods? I see you and your people to be in clear deviation and error. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that at the same time Allah showed Ibrahim alayhi salam the dominion of the skies and the earth so that he be amongst the people of yaqeen and certainty. Then Allah speaks about when he saw the night and then the moon and then the sun and he turned away from all of those. Now there's a lot of khurafat and there's a lot of false things that are mentioned by some people here. Okay, for some Mufassirins they add like some books even by the name of Qasas al-Anbiya, they said Ibrahim alayhi salam when he was young, he was placed in a cave and then Allah cared for him. When he came out, he saw the star and he said, Hada Rabbi, this is my Rabb. And then he saw the moon, he said, Hada Rabbi. Then he saw the sun, he said, Hada Rabbi. Then he left all of that. This is all false. And like Maududi, he puts in Tafseer al-Qur'an that one is a person, he commits a mistake on the pathway of learning. And one is he makes a mistake after he reaches a destination and achieves. Right? He says that this incident of Ibrahim alayhi salam is when he was searching for Allah. He was soul searching. He did not find Allah yet. This is also false. Right? Because Ibn Humam rahimahullah in his book in Aqidah, and thereafter Imam Qasim al-Qutb rahimahullah and also Qadi Bakr al-Baqillani, they all write that Imam Ibn Humam in al-Musayra, okay, they all write that a Nabi cannot commit kufr and shirk طرفة عين, for the blinking of an eye. So this verse is highly misinterpreted by many people. So I really wanted to clarify this. So the scholars explain that if we read the translation, we see Ibrahim alayhi salam, Allah says, فَلَمَّا جَنَّ عَلَيْهِ اللَّيْلِ. Let me just read it off the translation. So, and you guys can refer to it in your masahif as well, that when the night enveloped him, he saw a star, he said, this is my Lord. But when it vanished, he said, I do not like those who vanish. Later, when he saw the moon rising, he said, this is my Lord. But when it vanished, he said, had my Lord not guided me, I would have been among those gone astray. Thereafter, when he saw the sun rising, he said, this is my Lord, this is greater. Again, when it vanished, he said, O my people, I disown whatever you associate with Allah. I have indeed turned my face straight towards the one who created the heavens and the earth, and I am not one of those who associate partners with Allah. So some may think that he was trying to recognize Allah through this, but the verses in between, if you read it very carefully, it tells you that that's not what's happening. So that's why Imam Razi in Tafsir al-Kabir and Imam Muhayyan in Bahr al-Muhit and others, they say that this is istifham. Ibrahim alayhi salam meant, can the star be my Rabb? Ahada Rabbi? Can the moon be my Rabb? Can the sun be my Rabb? It was for the sake of argument. So this is one opinion. The second opinion held by Imam al-Alusi rahimahullah al-Ma'ani, Ibn Kathir's Tafsir, Baghawi in his Tafsir as well, they said, Hada Rabbi biza'mikum. This is my Rabb according to your claim, not in reality. And it shows, look, when he talks about the moon, he said, if my Rabb does not guide me, that means he's already recognized his Rabb. And so on and so forth. So his people argue with him. He said, will you go argue with me when Allah has guided me? And I do not fear the gods that you associate with, that they're going to put some infliction upon me. No. That's why all right, we'll leave that point for now. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in verse 83 that this is the proof we gave Ibrahim against his people. And we raise the status of whoever we want. The status of whoever we want. My Rabb is definitely all wise, all knowing. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the prophets who were on the same aqidah of Tawheed as Ibrahim alayhi salam. And there's about 25 prophets mentioned in the Qur'an, just in this one place, in the 16th ruku' of this juz, and in Surah Al-An'am, chapter 6, from verse 83 all the way to verse 86, Allah mentions 18 prophets out of the 25. So who are they by name? They're Ibrahim, Ishaq, Yaqub, Nuh, Dawood. So these are 5. Sulaiman, Ayub, Yusuf, Musa, Harun, Zakaria, Yahya, Isa, Ilyas, Ismail, Ilyasa, Yunus, Lut. 18 are mentioned here. And the other 7 are Idris, Hud, Shu'aib, Salih, Dhul-Kifl, Adam, and Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa alayhim salawatullahi wa salamuhu ajma'in. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ هَدَى اللَّهُ فَبِهُدَاهُ مُقْتَدِي. These are those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted guidance. So follow their guidance. All Anbiya in their usul, in their core beliefs, will always say Tawheed, Risala, Akhirah. All Anbiya call towards this. To all the nations that they were sent to. وَلِكُلِّ قَوْمٍ هَادٍ. Every nation had a guide. Yes, there were differences in Sharia and so on and so forth, but they are minor differences. They are furu'i differences. All right. Thereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shifts back to mentioning after the da'wah of Anbiya and the da'wah of Tawheed, Allah shifts back to the signs of His oneness in the world. Now, a person cannot recognize Allah's being, but he can recognize Allah through His sifat and His af'al. Allah's attributes and qualities, وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى, Allah has the most beautiful names, and through His actions, Allah's creation. Look. And so let's read these. It's from verse 95. It's very beautifully mentioned. Let's mention it ayah by ayah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that إِنَّ اللَّهَ فَالِقُ الْحَبِّ وَالنَّوَى. Surely Allah is the one who splits the grain and nawa, the date stone, when it sprouts. يُخْرِجُ الْحَيَّ مِنَ الْمَيِّتِ وَمُخْرِجُ الْمَيِّتِ مِنَ الْحَيِّ. He brings forth the living from the dead, and He is the one who brings forth the dead from the living. A simple example that from from the dead is like from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings a chicken from an egg, a lifeless egg, and bring forth the dead from the living is like Allah brings an egg from a hen. An egg is not a living, it's not alive yet. ذَلِكُمُ That is Allah. To where then are you being turned away? What are we being turned away by? By our desires. Then Allah says further, فَالِقُ الْإِصْبَاحِ He is the one who causes the dawn to break. He made the night for rest and the sun and the moon for calculations, reckoning. This is a measure set by the Almighty, the All-Knowing. ذَلِكَ تَقْدِيرُ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَلِيمِ Then Allah says further, and He's the one who made for you the stars. Why? Allah tells us, so that you may be guided by them in darkness of the land and the sea. We have elaborated the signs for the people who know. Then Allah tells us further that, and He is the one who made or who created you from one person. Then you have a place to dwell and a place to sojourn, a place where we stay and a place where we leave. Sometimes we say that a permanent place and a temporary place. Then Allah says, we've elaborated the signs for the people who understand. Then Allah says further, and this is a very detailed verse. He is the one who sent down water from the skies, the heavens. Then we brought forth with it vegetation of all kinds. Then from it we brought grains set upon one another. From the palm trees, from their spathes comes forth the low-hanging branches. And Allah says, we also produce, vines and the olive and the pomegranate. Look at the amount of seeds in there. From one seed is created, different taste, different color, different texture, all from the ground, all from that one water. Either similar or not similar to each other. Sometimes fruits are similar, some are not. Olives are different to pomegranates. Pomegranates are different to olives. Different fruits of different types. There's pears, there's apples, there's mangoes, there's bananas. Look at its fruit when it bears fruit. انظروا إلى ثمره إذا أثمر وينعي. So look at its fruit when it bears fruits and it's ripening. Surely in all this there are signs for people who believe. So Allah is telling us that there's two types of people that look at the world. Those who are believers, wherever they look, they see Allah and His Qudra. وَفِي كُلِّ شَيْءٍ لَهُ آيَةٌ تَدُلُّ عَلَى أَنَّهُ وَاحِدٌ. In everything, in Allah's creation, there is a sign that is telling us Allah exists and He is one and alone. And then there's a kafir. When he looks at the world, or she looks at the world, the whole world for them is rubbed in a cobweb of materialism, or mixed in a cobweb of materialism. They can't see anything beyond that. So it's just about what glasses you wear. You must come to Allah with clear glasses. The person who has blue glasses sees the whole world blue. The one who has green sees the whole world green, and so on and so forth. We need to come with clear, crystal clear glasses, and Allah will show us how we are meant to see. Bringing preconceived notions to the Qur'an or to Allah is one of the ways to be misguided, as we mentioned in the first lesson. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala thereafter also tells us that once we think of all these things, what's going to happen? We're going to be able to recognize Allah. And the best way to recognize Allah in the akhir is when we will see Allah. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that لا تدركه الأبصار وهو يدرك الأبصار وهو اللطيف الخبير, verse 103. That their sights cannot encompass Allah. and He encompasses all those who have sight. And Allah is the subtle and the all aware, the all acquainted. Now, the Mu'tazila, a sect in Islam, used, and some people use this verse, say, look, we cannot see Allah. So the saying of Allah that's mentioned in the Qur'an, like وَوُجُوهِ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاظِرَةٌ لِرَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٌ, and لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا الْحُسْنَى وَزِيَادَةٌ, and the hadith that's mentioned in the Sihah, that إِنَّكُمْ تَرَوْنَ رَبَّكُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ لَا تُضَامُونَ فِي رُؤْيَتِهِ, until the end of the hadith. They say this will be looking by the heart. This is incorrect. The Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they all agree that we will see Allah with our eyes on the Day of Judgment. How? Allah knows best. We are not told of the details, but we will see Allah. It will be ru'yatul basar, not ru'yatul qalb. It will be with the eyes, not the heart. So this is an important belief of the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Now, what about this verse? This verse saying that we will not encompass Allah. Even then, we cannot encompass Allah. How can a limited being know unlimited or encompass unlimited one? So, this is this verse. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the end, He discusses the mushrikeen, and Allah warns us not to swear at their gods because they will swear Allah back without knowledge. And Allah says that they take an oath, and a very strong oath, that if you bring a sign to them, they will believe you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet, signs are not in our control, it's in Allah. Miracles are in the hands of Allah. And perhaps, what do you know? When it comes, you will not believe. And those who want to live like this, Allah says, وَنَظَرُهُمْ فِي طُغْيَانِهِمْ يَعْمَهُونَ. That's with which the Jews finishes, that Allah leaves them to remain blind in their transgression. So when Allah gives you signs, you must reflect upon them and we must believe them. If we turn away and we bring excuses, and tu hi na chahe to baatein hain hazar. The Urdu poet says, if you don't want something, there's 100,000 things, there's thousands of things to say. If you want something, even one proof of Allah is enough. But if you are a person who's always in doubt, and you're a person who's not being honest, and being a man of integrity, then 1,000 are enough for you. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us tawfiq and understanding. Let's quickly review this juz before we finish. So we started this juz with it has 19 ruku'as. And the first ruku' it discussed about the Nasara, who when they heard the Qur'an they started weeping. And number 2, it warns the believers not to make things halal and haram ourselves, but leave it to Allah. And the oaths were also mentioned. The third ruku', some principles of ihram and the sacredness of the Kaaba and the prophetic mission was mentioned. Ruku' number 4, we were warned not to ask futile and useless questions and denunciations of practices of the polytheists, like the animals that made haram themselves. Ruku' number 5, there was descriptions of one of the scenes of the Day of Judgment, and some miracles of Isa alayhi salam were mentioned again. And also ruku' number 6, when Isa alayhi salam on the Day of Judgment will disavow the fact of having called for his worship. The next ruku' number 7, starts with Surah Al-An'am, so Allah's oneness and His signs are mentioned. Ruku' number 2, the mention of clear evidence of Tawheed, Risala and Akhirah. These are indicated here, or these are mentioned here. Ruku' number 9, a description of a scene of Qiyamah and the attitude of the deniers at the time when they will see Jahannam. Ruku' number 10, Allah mentioned the reality of the world and the fate of those who deny his meeting Him finally. And Allah consoled the Prophet ﷺ when he was faced by denial on the hands of the mushrikeen and so on and so forth. And then ruku' number 11, there's a mention of the punishment of this world of the people who do not believe in Allah, right, and denied the messengers. Ruku' number 12, there was a call to stay in the company of those who spend their time remembering Allah and those who make fun of the signs of Allah to turn away from them. Ruku number 13, Allah unveiled the path of the unrighteous, and he reminded the Prophet ﷺ, or he reminded that the Prophet does not have the power to produce the punishment demanded by the deniers. So bring the punishment of Allah, they would say. The Prophet ﷺ cannot do that. And Allah is the supreme judge and all knowledgeable, and He will do it. Ruku number 14, Allah has assigned angels above us to protect us, and some other discussions happened. Ruku number 15, there was a denunciation of the unreasonable nature of worshipping other than Allah, and the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam was mentioned. Ruku number 16, mention of some prophets, 18, namely number, or specifically number. And Ruku number 17, there's a description of the reality of the Qur'an, its purpose, virtues, and message. Ruku number 18, there were some proofs of Allah's Qudra and oneness. Ruku number 19, Allah, there's an unveiling of the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the creator, and the Qur'an as a criterion. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions the reason why we should not swear at the gods of the mushrikeen, like actually swear at them. I mentioned to say that they're false is fine, but to swear at them is what's prohibited here. Now, let's quickly reflect on some parts of the Juz. So Allah speaks about the Ahlul Kitab, that they were moved by the Qur'an. Are we moved by the Qur'an as Muslims? We need to remove those locks on our hearts. We need to become free. And number two, Allah mentions there's different injunctions. We need to be very wary about them. Now, we shouldn't just say, Wallahi billahi tallahi, like no tomorrow. You should not take qasam again and again. And we should, be very careful how we want to enjoy leisure and entertainment. And be aware of the Day of Judgment. There's also the importance of Tawheed that is highlighted in the surah time and again, and having the Akhirah before you, and not overindulging in this world. And also that we need to have role models in life. Those who don't have role models, they are lost. So our role models, our muqtadeen is the Anbiya, the ones we follow. Our muqtada, the one that we follow, is the Anbiya alayhi salatu wassalam, Mu'adi Anbiya alayhi salatu wassalam. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us tawfiq. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.